but it had her upset, frustrated, and she wasn't feeling so great. Um, and when that happened, I thought, and it's funny, it was because it was just a thought, and I recognized that almost as soon as it happened, that when the situation arose, and I was actually in the kitchen trying to put dinner together for both of them, and I forget there was something else going on, and I thought, one more thing. I don't know if I can handle one more thing. I think this might be my limit. And then I was, well, that's just a thought. That's not necessarily true. So let's
Yeah.
set it aside. But of course, there's still this feeling in the body that was driving it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I'm just going to have to let that be. I'm just going to have to just let it be, let it run its course. It doesn't really mean anything. It may feel kind of uncomfortable or, unpleasant, but that's it.
Yeah.
And so it
Understand.
passed. But there really was this moment of um, just um, really kind of wanting the parade of things to stop because there have been other things too. Like one of our dogs, it appears he might have of all things, an autoimmune disorder. The vet thinks he may have Cushing's.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah,
Mm.
and so he drinks a ton of water,
Mm.
which means he urinates a ton of water, and I have to make
Yeah.
sure he goes outside regularly. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
mean, I've got a rug in the living room that I'm trying to save because he saturated one area of it. So I've been steam cleaning the
Oh,
hell out of it
God.
using,
Yeah.
urine treatment and things like that. And so there's that's been going on, and I forget that there are a handful of other things that kind of came along with all of this other stuff, and um, and so and it's I'm sleep deprived because I've been up really late every night. And it hit me yesterday. Well, no wonder I'm up late every night because it's the only time I can get a few hours where I'm not having to clean anything up. I'm not having to look after somebody, solve a problem, do
Yep.
something. I can actually just sit there
Yeah.
and do nothing. I put on something, some kind of show in the background, some sort of TV show, and I'll sit there with the guitar and I'll just
Yeah.
go over repertoire, or I've been working on learning some new things, and I'll just
Nice.
for
Yeah.
2 to 4 hours, I'll just sit there and just work through stuff.
Yeah.
Um, just because it's fairly mindless, and I don't have to do anything, so I can just sit there and do that.
Yeah.
But now I'm paying the price, because I don't get enough sleep.
Yeah, I remember that similar kind of thing back when I used to take care of my mom. It would be like, I'd put her to bed and then it was like the time that I could kind of allocate to myself would be those late hours where I'd, be working on music or something like that, exactly the same kind of thing where it's like, okay, this is my me time. So I feel like I'm, you know, giving myself something to replenish that need of like being met and having my needs fulfilled in some way. But it is always on the downside of then you're into sleep deprivation because you can't make it up on the other end. Uh, it is hard because you do have a lot of things that are kind of pulling on, you have to be a lot of things for a lot of different people and dogs right now. Um, and it is important to also have that being able to hear the ways that you need to like obviously on one hand, the body is saying it needs rest and sleep,
Mhm.
right? Like that is something that we know you need, and you unfortunately can't bargain your way out of that. Um, what is it that you feel like you get when you are having those couple hours to yourself to put on a show and play guitar and do that sort of thing?
Just the fact that there's not anything I have to do. I mean, it really seems, I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like. It's just simply that no one's going to call me to take care of something or fix something or, handle something. I'm not going to have to clean up after a dog or, um, any of the dog related things that happen throughout the course of a day. I can ignore, like one room in the house really needs to be dusted. It really needs to be dusted. And I can in doing that, I give myself permission to set that aside. Like it's not the time, it's late at night. I can worry about that tomorrow. or any of the other things
But
that need to be taken care of.
yeah, but everything that you said would be exactly the same if you were in bed. You could say use
Uh,
that same justification. No, no, I
Sleep.
need to sleep. I'm in bed, and that would give you the
Uh,
exact same justification for all of those things that you just listed, which makes me question, is there something else that you get from that solitude, that time awake and to yourself where you're doing these things? Is there something that those actual activities are providing you that sleep doesn't seem to be fulfilling?
I don't know the importance of putting on some sort of TV program. I really don't. I mean, because sometimes I'll watch it, and a lot of times it's just in the background. It's playing, and I'll occasionally, I'll give it just enough attention to keep up with whatever the plot line is.
Mm,
Um, Playing guitar is kind of an odd bird because it doesn't have the. It used to have this really very clear, very substantial feeling of enjoyment and satisfaction.
mm,
And sometimes I think that, I mean, it's not that I dislike it. It's just that in the last, what, 8 months or so, 7 or 8 months, something about it has changed. It doesn't have quite the attraction or pull that it used to. So
mm,
I sometimes wonder if it's largely out of habit, but there are still, even though there's not the drive behind it that there used to be, there are still, I think it almost really exists more as thought because there are thoughts like, I really need to, or I really like to have a much better repertoire.
mm.
And, so I work on learning tunes, or,
Yeah.
I've always wanted to learn to do Travis picking. So I've been working on that. But it doesn't have, I'm not sure what it has. I guess I'm going to have to look into this a little more carefully
Mm,
because it doesn't have the pull that it used to, but there's still some kind of um, urge or drive or intention to do it.
yeah, I think there's going to be something interesting for you to explore. And you could even go like, okay, it's midnight or whatever time, you would normally either be going to bed or going to retreat into your cave. And in that moment, even just run the thought experiment like, okay, you know what? Instead of staying up and doing this stuff, I'm going to go to bed now. And then see what shows up in resistance to that. Are there feelings in the body of like, you're being deprived of something or that there's some pull to do something else or, just see what thoughts come up, what feelings come up in the body, because those are going to be pretty insightful.
Okay.
Um, you're, you know, on one hand that just going to bed is actually a kind, compassionate, healthy thing to do, that the body, I'm sure would actually appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, so that's one way that you could actually be kind and nice to the body and all of that. So it's interesting to see what other needs are being met or seem to be being met or are at least being hinted at needing some sort of attention um, by that pull to not go to bed and do this other thing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
notice if those the thoughts, those like resistance thoughts come up, like all the things that you said that, well, it's that you're not going to be bothered by the dogs, you're not going to be bothered, you don't have to do anything for anybody and all of that. And just recognize that again, all of those things are fully true if you just went to bed instead. So what else is it? If you have those similar thoughts coming up, trying to create a context for this in those ways that you're familiar with. See if there's something else that is below that that's actually really pulling you to this activity and not just going to bed.
I hear you and I understand the general idea, but I feel like I'm not getting it really clearly.
Sure. Well, because what I'm getting at is that there might be something else that you are deriving from those activities of staying up and playing guitar and stuff that maybe not, it might not be something that is only available to you through the staying up and playing guitar. Th-
Um,
There might be some feeling of self-appreciation or creative expression or emotional, I mean, I don't know. Like for me, I know when I used to sit and play, it would be like an emotional catharsis. It was kind of like a way a lot of times for getting in touch with something and allowing it to be expressed in ways that I wouldn't necessarily do externally throughout the day. Or even
hmm,
like going in and writing and stuff would come out in writing that wouldn't be there, in just daily expression. So for me, that it was serving a purpose of like, catharsis, getting in touch with emotions that I otherwise wouldn't have been, releasing things that otherwise wouldn't have been released. Also just feelings of like, you know, like giving myself that permission to have some time to myself that wasn't completely stressed for, worrying about somebody else and being on duty all the time. I think, looking back, maybe there were ways that during the day I would have been able to, had I been, more aware of these things at the time, been aware of meeting my needs in other ways throughout the day, recognizing that, I was stressed and instead of just waiting till the nighttime when I could kind of diffuse it in some ways, maybe being more working with and meeting those feelings of stress that were going on throughout the day, the feeling of like putting all of my needs aside, finding other ways to either meet my needs throughout the day or even be aware of what they were. I mean, just even being aware of the fact that I was just putting stuff so far aside that I didn't even know that I was needing things that weren't being, recognized. Like it was like
hmm,
I think I had gotten to the point where I was so used to just being of service that I wasn't really even aware that there was uh, something that was being, feeling deprived. So it was like even coming in contact with those feelings of deprivation that were going on through the day would have been very illustrative, would have been, showed me something that, okay, well, now how can I find a creative way of meeting this throughout the day where I'm not shirking the duties that I have? It wouldn't necessarily make me less effective or less available, but more to where instead I wasn't just repressing all of that stuff for, you know, 18 hours a day or whatever, and then only just letting it out in some way for a couple hours before bed. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, it does. Um, I'm just trying to think of how to sum that up simply for to myself.
Yeah.
Um, Let me see if I can do this. In a short, convenient little package of words. So the idea is to find out what need is not being met in order to be able to actually meet that need through means that don't come with a price rather than um, being up all hours.
Yeah, exactly. And there might be something where it's like you're being awake for those couple hours, even though you're not openly expressing it, is like your um, acknowledgement of your sacrifice throughout the day and your self-appreciation. It's like your little good job, Darrell. You made it. Here's your reward for the night and little pat on the back. So maybe even just that little thing of throughout the day, giving yourself those little pats on the back where it's like, okay, task completed, did that. Take a break, feel into the body for a minute, give yourself a moment of clarity and presence and like, okay, well done. You did well. A little positive reinforcement, and then you're on to the next thing. But instead of just being like the good soldier who just constantly goes from one thing to another to another to another, take those moments for self-appreciation in there, and that might also help to kind of ease that feeling of constantly being bombarded with one thing after another.
Well, and even just for sake of being clear and being totally forthcoming, it's now there are some days where it can get kind of nonstop, but most days I can come back here for a period of time and sit down and do something, whether it's just take in, like I've been watching a lot of interviews on YouTube,
Hmm.
or working on an instrument, or um,
Nice.
doing some writing, whatever.
Hmm.
And but the issue is that more often than not, I get a limited amount of time before something happens that means that I have to get up and go deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's sort of this idea in the background, that yeah, I'm not doing anything right now, but it's not going to last.
Yeah.
This is gonna uh, I'm gonna have to get up and go do something before too long.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that I know exactly what you mean. Eh, As long as we have that thought that I know that I can't complete what I'm doing to my satisfaction because you're on that sort of time schedule of somebody else's interruption that's coming. And so
Hmm.
you always feel like you're either rushing to complete something or that you can't quite settle in. And so is the nighttime one different from the midday one only because you assume at that point that nothing is going to step in and interrupt you and you can end when you want as opposed to during the day when it's not so much your.
Yes, but I would put it slightly differently. At
Mhm.
night, I recognize that something could still happen that will mean I have to take care of whatever, but the odds decrease
Mhm.
dramatically.
Yeah.
They go from like 99% down to about 5 or 10.
Yeah. I think it might help during the day while you're doing those things. And I know it's not necessarily a conscious, like a fully conscious thought that, I'm stealing an hour here and then eventually something is going to come in and take it. Um, steal me back. But do you find that it's still a problem when you're like fully present with what you're doing, like fully engaged in those midday hours?
How do you mean?
Well, if, you know, if I know I've got approximately half hour to an hour where nobody is necessarily coming to bother me, but I know something is probably going to pop up.
Right.
There might be a less full investment in what I'm doing because it's kind of like it's sort of the equivalent of working with one ear open or, being kind of alert. Like there's like this extra heightened sense of I'm kind of focusing on what I'm doing, but I'm also aware of that the limitation of the time and that the possibility of that um impending whatever is coming. But if you were like what I'm saying is that it is possible to have that sort of such total investment in what you're doing that it even drives out because in the moment when you are working and nobody is interrupting you, that is a complete moment of uninterrupted Darrell time, right? The potential for interruption is just a thought that hasn't happened yet. It's a thought warning about something which may or may not happen. Yes, statistically, the odds probably are high enough that something might, but in the moment of doing the thing, it's technically no different during the day than it is at night, right? There is still, when you're sitting
Hmm.
in the middle of the day working on a guitar or playing or writing, that is literally no different than when you're doing the same thing at night. The only
It's
difference
just the
is that
thought that changes it.
exactly, it's that overlay that says that this time during the day is more limited by somebody else's potential interruption than the one at night. But functionally, the actual activity is exactly the same. So every moment of that, if you are fully invested in it and can kind of work to lose that feeling of, the ticking clock, that might really change your experience of those moments of Darrell time during the day.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we've done this before,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
So I would say investigate when you are having those periods of Darrell time throughout the day. Are there thoughts that are coming up that are explicitly like, oh, I wonder when the dog is going to, or I wonder when I'm going to get called to, or, any sort of like anticipation thoughts that are there? Just notice if they show up. Notice if there's a feeling of tension in the body. Do you feel like there's like a feeling of physical stress or
hmm,
strain in the body that's like waiting for the call to come? See if that sort of thing is there and see if you can breathe into it, relax, even, put a hand on the heart. It's okay. I'm safe. This is my time. Something like that. It's okay for me to be here. Relaxing into that. This is your time to do this. All of that is hypothetical right now. Any other call is not here. It may or may not happen. But right now, this is just pure unadulterated Daryl time.
hmm. Okay. I'm certainly willing to do that. The only thing I think that's going to be hard to get around is I know that it is going to happen. I'm going to be called to do something, even if it's just, it's been a while since the dogs went out. I need to go let them
Mhm.
out.
Yeah,
You know?
but again, while you're doing it, it's not. I mean, it's like saying, we all know we're going to die, so we might as well just dig a grave and jump in it today. Like, it's the long-term version of it, but it's like I can't enjoy being on vacation this week because I know I have to go back to work the following week. Those are longer scale versions, but it's the same thing. Like this is your 5 minutes, your 1 minute where you are not actually taking the dog for a walk or being called. So can you fully enjoy and embrace that 1 minute without the clause that it has to last longer
Uh,
than it does?
okay. All right. Yeah. Fair enough. I mean,
Oh,
that makes sense.
yeah,
So, hmm.
and
We've done it before because, during the group with Kaiser and Kristen
mhm,
said something, it's basically the same, almost the same thing to me. I mean, it had a bit of a different twist to it about, you know, having to clean up after the dogs for the
mm,
however many, thousandth time or what have you.
mm,
And that, you have to set those kinds of thoughts aside. Um, that you have to, you related it to, I think it was that movie Memento. What if
mm,
you had no memory? Then this would be like every time you did it would be like
yeah,
doing it for the first time. And so I
yeah,
really took that to heart, and
wonderful.
that completely changed. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think of it that way at all. In fact, um, usually when it comes to doing something of that nature, cleaning up after the dogs or something, I usually wind up making a joke.
yeah,
um, so I mean, it's very doable. I mean, I've done it before. I know how to do it. So,
yeah. I will say the one place where I think it might be a little bit extra strain is if you're doing something which is where it's like a project that's like, has sort of a completion to it. Like say you're like rewiring a guitar or something where it's like, I'm starting it now and then there will be a completion of the job when it's done and then having that interrupted at different intervals. I understand
mhm.
it's a different kind of thing. And of course, there are practical things to take into consideration there. But really important is what does it feel like when you are having that frustration of interruption, right? Like, okay,
Mhm.
I've soldered one wire and now I have to go take the dogs out and the rest of them are just left hanging and waiting. What does that feeling of incompleteness feel like in the body? There's like that, waiting for like in Rocky Horror, anticipate shun, it's like that waiting for the other shoe to drop, like that
Right.
need for closure. it's like, how does that feel? Well, feel that tension that's in the body and recognize that again, that doesn't mean that you need to solder those next wires. It's just simply something that you can feel into and go, oh, okay. So there's a state of like feeling of irresolution in the body. There's some tension there. There's something that feels hard to breathe. There's something that feels, like there's a pull, like my muscles are tight and moving in a certain way. Okay, can you just feel that? Okay. It doesn't actually mean that those wires need to be soldered right now. This is just a feeling in the body that I can be with. And then okay, now I can go walk the dog and just feel as that tension just moves or releases or changes. Or if you are the whole time that you're walking the dog having thoughts of the guitar and those hanging wires that still need to be soldered and all of that. And if those then keep re-triggering those feelings in the body of, I need to get back to do this, I need to get back to do this. And then all the thoughts of like, well, I need more time to do this and it's not fair. And all those stories that tend to spiral out, if any of that's happening. But it's really just about being aware that like, even that feeling of irresolution is itself just something that you can completely be with that does not actually call out for action necessarily. Something doesn't have to be changed. It's just our really it's our way of getting to that equanimity to have the flexibility to just allow things to be however they are and not be constantly thrown into some state of suffering because I was supposed to go outside and run and the rain happened, or, something like if we're constantly expecting something to happen a certain way, we are always going to be disappointed, or, there's always going to be something that's coming up. So it's helping
Right.
us have that flexibility that, like, oh, thought I was going to be soldering the rest of this. Apparently that has to wait.
Okay. All right. Um, hmm. Okay. I'm just thinking about learning to pay attention more.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's that's something that's developing anyway. I mean, I noticed, as just one example, I've noticed that there are times where, um, say, I'm going to get up from this chair or I'm going to get up out of bed, and we conventionally we want to say automatically, as if
Yeah,
sometimes it's not, and
I
that's
know.
just not true.
I know.
The difference, I guess, is that there are times where we do it with the idea that one, there's an intention and that somehow we're responsible for that. So there are other times where there's not that intention and there's not that sense of someone being responsible for getting up. So what'll happen is the impulse to get up starts to form, and immediately the mind goes, "Whoa, what's going on here?" And just just without anything else at work, just wakes up and looks at what's going on there to see what's happening in the moment of decision and
Yeah.
see what's really taking place, which is really clear and obvious that it's happening all on its own without the input of some believed or assumed entity. Uh,
Hmm.
and so it's been really interesting to see this just happening without any other programs in front of it, whether it's the assumption of someone doing it or an intention or that I was paying attention. And it really
Yeah.
is, it's really been interesting to watch that happen. So
No.
paying attention, I think for most of us, that's something that tends to be difficult to do because we don't live, especially here in the West, we don't live in a world that values not beyond certain limited things. It doesn't value paying attention and especially paying attention um, more and more often and with some abilities to sustain it or at least desire to sustain it.
No.
Um, but um, since it's already kind of happening in other areas, it seems like it's just another place where this can get built up.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. it's a funny, I think I don't know if we like know enough about the brain yet to
Mm.
know why there's it is so helpful in a lot of ways to have that strong ability to focus and pay attention and have that constant mindfulness when we're doing this stuff. Because at first it does feel like, it's creating that sense of doership, that sense of self, that agency that like has to stay focused and is constantly bringing the mind back. Um, when the whole system is automatic to begin with, it's like there's that I think, and I don't know, but I suspect it might be like a feedback, part of the feedback loop, for the sort of mind to know itself. Like, I actually heard an interesting description recently about, uh, like, the brain doesn't have any nerves in it, it can't feel anything,
Oh,
right?
oh, okay, yeah.
Right. And also the heart doesn't actually have any feeling. Like there are no nerves that feel anything in the heart.
Hmm.
So we have effectively like the if you're having a heart attack, you notice the sensations in your chest, your arm, other places that's radiating out that's not actually directly from, you're not actually feeling the heart having the heart attack. You're feeling the relational pain and tightness in other areas. And what I've heard is that it's kind of like the brain's way or the body's way of recognizing that this is happening because the actual organ itself doesn't have those signals to sense it directly. And that our like if you're having like a feeling of fear and or anxiety and you feel, churning in the stomach or tightness in the chest or things like that, since your brain can't physically feel fear or anxiety, it's basically like the body's reaction to it is the way that the brain then recognizes. It's like that feedback for the brain to recognize that this state is happening. And so there's like
Huh.
it's using the body to basically feed back with some of the recognition of what is happening, which is a weird thing to to kind of think about. But but
Yeah.
but I wonder if that sort of what we take to be our conscious recognition of emotional states and the, feeling that like, well, now I'm going to sit and watch my breath and then get caught away in thoughts and then intentionally bring it back, bring the attention back to the breath. But it's interesting to kind of wonder how much of all of those are just sort of byproducts for the brain to kind of have a secondary knowledge of what's going on or have a better view of what's going on in terms of its interaction with the world, Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. It's just what a bizarre. There's this kind of almost like science fiction like implication that the brain is more than just simply an organ, that the brain is has some sort of, and I know this is going to sound obvious, but I don't mean it in the way that we usually think of it,
Yeah.
that the brain inherently has its own self-awareness
Yeah.
and we're not even aware of it. And so
Yeah.
it's doing things to get some sort of information about what's going on.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
very, it's really kind of weird to
Yeah, I know.
consider.
It is. I'm still. I can't. I think we might have talked about this at one point because I remember hearing a neuroscientist talking about this, and uh, it just it's one of those things where, and it's so crazy because I'm also aware of the fact that it is a brain right now postulating and confused about the way that it works.
Yeah.
Right? Like it is like meta levels of weirdness, but
Strange loops.
yeah, it is. But like, there's like one network of the brain that is, dealing with attention specifically, right? So like I think I've used this example. I talked with somebody, I can't remember. I feel like it was you though, but it's like if we were looking at a forest and the attention is to focus on that one particular birch tree in front of me, and you focus on that one particular tree, there is another network of the brain which basically monitors all of the other networks that are going on and make sure that the task that is being attended to is being attended to correctly. So, like, it knows if my attention has wandered from that birch tree to the maple next to it and brings it back. So my question is, what is the internal experience, if that could be said, for that task monitoring network to recognize that there is like the amount of, pinpoint focus on one tree at a distance compared to the minute switch of that focus to the tree next to it. Yet it knows that there's a task to stay to that white tree and not the brown tree next to it. And like it's baffling trying to kind of ration out using the kind of logic that we're used to using, but then also the fact that, again, this is the brain itself trying to puzzle this out as we're having this conversation.
Right.
And it does not need to know how it works for it to work. And what I wonder is if this conscious experience that we actually all just take to be our, you know, willful agent filled conscious experience is that. Like, is that the experience that that task monitoring network is having? That is the feedback loop, which is allowing it to know when that feedback is, or that task is not being attended to. You know, is there some internal experience which is not available to this conscious awareness, whatever we call this? Or is this conscious awareness, this experience that we all have of life, the actual monitoring that's happening? Like, is that how it's working? That when we get that feedback from, I'm watching my breath, I'm watching my breath, I'm watching my breath, I'm thinking about making dinner. Oh, right, watching my breath. Is that the actual internal experience of the brain just creating that it's using? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But the question is, can you ever really know?
No, well, no, I mean, not for us now, obviously.
Right.
Maybe eventually scientists will figure out some way of getting, a little bit more accurate about. But it's just one of those things where it's like, it's so fascinating that this, what we take to be a conscious experience, is felt to be so uniquely disconnected from the biology, which I think is why it gives rise to that feeling that, like, well, I'm some all-knowing soul, or
Hmm.
ever-present consciousness, or something that is so completely detached from the biological unit that it feels like it has a knowledge and a wisdom and an entity of its own, some whole life that is maybe eternal or timeless or disconnected, and it's separate from this biological being. But it's also quite possible that that whole thing is just the matrix like experience of the toiling of the biological thing. Like, it is literally how the biological organism knows itself and its world, and it's kind of the interface through which it interacts with the world in order to, stay alive.
Right. I could be wrong, but it seems like all of that supposes this idea that somehow everything arises from the brain.
Yeah.
And um, I've never really been entirely comfortable with the idea that um, whatever this is, we call it consciousness or awareness, whatever it is just sort of this epiphenomenon that
Yeah.
arises out of, or organic, um, you know, what is essentially a computer.
Yeah.
Um, and I, I don't know. I've never been entirely comfortable with that idea. So, I mean, that opens up a whole other can of worms to, begin to ask, well, is it is something else at work? I mean, is it something that is being transmitted, and the brain is just a receiver?
Yeah, we don't know. It's
Right.
really fascinating. I mean, it's interesting that there are ways of just, magnetically stimulating different parts of the brain, and it creates vast changes in the experience of that consciousness. Um,
Yeah.
and then I know Pranilla just recently found, have you seen the telepathy tapes, I think they're called?
Hmm.
It
I've never heard of
apparently
this.
came out in 2024 and then became apparently is like the number one podcast in the US in the beginning of 2025. And it's this woman in this I think she was a psychiatrist, something like that. They're doing these studies with nonverbal autistic people who seem to have like telepathic capabilities, but usually it's like with
Oh,
like one
wow.
particular parent or something, and they find that they can communicate non-verbally, and and it's quite remarkable. Little bit like, I've only watched or listened to like one episode so far. There's like 10, and they're making a movie based off of it, and you can pay like 10 euros, I guess, to get like the video footage of the stuff. And I was just
Huh.
digging around a little bit, and the problem is I've seen like a lot of sort of skepticism back and forth on it, that apparently the way that it's described in the audio podcast doesn't quite hold up when you actually watch the video, the behind the scenes footage, that it's not as, well regulated in the studies, and that it's not really exactly as they had described it was being performed. So there were other ways that other factors might have been involved that aren't. So it's just, I don't know. I don't know enough about it yet to have any sort of opinion one way or the other. Um, but it opens up those questions of, you know, where is the limitation of one individual bit of consciousness compared to another, and how much, like, even on the Todd Murphy videos that I've been watching, where he was going through and uh it's all basically from the brain with his stuff, but talking about how people can do remote viewing and stuff by, and that interesting things like the magnetic field of the earth at certain times, how that affects our ability to either have those abilities or not, and that people tend to only have like easier times having remote viewing stuff and telepathic stuff when the 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 geomagnetism is really quiet. And then on days when it's more active, it disrupts something, and it's harder for us to do these things. And it's just all sorts of, we really don't understand at this point the possible web of complexity of what makes our experience, and how much of it is, yeah, like the consciousness being an epiphenomena of brain functioning, and how much is based off of something that we have no tangible knowledge of at this point, or anything else. It's just, it's fascinating to explore. And if anything, I think it's just useful for keeping us in that space of not knowing, where it keeps us constantly where we can't come down on any absolute conclusion about anything.
Yeah, well, I'm all for that idea because, the problem is that we still have a lot of people. I mean, a huge number of people. I mean, I'd say it's probably the dominant way of understanding being in the world and what that means. But there, especially within, well, I guess even you could say religion does the same thing in its own way, but with science and the fact that everything is slanted heavily towards this kind of reductionist scientific materialism,
Yeah.
um, people get this attitude that we've explained most of it and we understand most of it, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we've
No.
explained
No.
and understand, a fraction of a fraction of a percent,
Yeah.
and things like telepathy and out of body experiences and all of these other things seem amazing because that view leads us to believe that we're um, encapsulated in this meat suit, and the what it seems, it, I won't say true, but it seems like it's a safe statement to make that this perceived boundary of skin, is not a perceived boundary. That
Yeah.
everything actually, it's really one big something with lots of
Yeah.
little seeming parts. And
Yeah.
so the idea that there's something here that is isolated within this boundary and not directly connected to something out there, another of that kind. And so, you know, you're able to communicate without opening your mouth. Ears are not involved. You don't have to hear it. Seems amazing because that that belief is unquestioned that there's a boundary, there's a barrier, and there's here and over there when there's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
It's all just one big interrelated, interconnected, interdependent, whatever.
It is.
And
Yeah,
so
it
it's not
really
so
is.
astonishing that, one little part can hear the thought of another little part without
Yeah.
mouths and ears being involved.
Yeah. 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 We are a fractal universe. I mean, you
Mhm.
come down, it's like we act as though this is like one solid unit of a body, and yet we can break it down into all the cells and all the, subatomic particles and all that. And it's like, as as above, so below. And it's like, you get smaller and smaller and smaller, and we're all of these little individual parts that are making up this one particular organism, but this organism is just one of those little cells of, the society and of the the planet. And then you see, like, the planet is just part of the movement of the solar system, which is part of the movement of the galaxy, which is part of the movement of the, and it's just sort of those little
Yeah.
nested patterns that go from infinitesimally small to unimaginably large. And this is just one particular, unit in that what was it? What's the name? Oh, Jesus. Even blanking on his name. Ken Wilber. It has the, is it Holon, I think is the term that he used, because he's got like it's the oh God, it's been so long since I read his books. Because it was about having like a non-dominator hierarchy where like everything
Huh.
is nested within itself, but in a way where it's not built on the kind of like dominator hierarchy like that we're, our societies tend to be based on, where one person is the oppressor of the others and that sort of thing, but where everything only functions because everything is nested at different layers, and every layer is as important as the one supposedly above or below it, because everything falls apart if it's not there.
Right.
So, and I think he used the term holon, where it was like each part is itself a whole on its own, if I'm remembering that correctly. And I really remember years ago when I read that, I really resonated with that
Huh.
view of it.
Yeah, I've heard his name for decades, and I've even seen his books, and I've just never crossed the line into actually picking one up and
Yeah,
buying it, or bringing it home and reading it. Um,
yeah,
and I don't know why. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I've been inclined towards for most of my life.
yeah. I had a period where I was like super. It was like hit at exactly the right time, and it was like super influential, and it just like everything felt like it really opened up in a way. And then I kind of forgot about it, and it was kind of like one of those links in a chain that, had a really solid purpose at one point, and then
Right.
other things came in that resonated better for whatever reason. But
Huh. I kind of like that. At first, this was bringing to mind that diagram of Douglas Harding's where it shows the structure. I think he said something like the hierarchy of heaven and earth. It may not have been hierarchy, I can't remember, but it
mm,
shows a being here, and it goes to infinitely small this direction and infinitely large that direction, and
yeah,
how things appear depends on how close you are to something and where you are at in that spectrum. But
yeah.
that and it's funny because of what Douglas Harding has to say, that it seems to kind of it, it's seems like it's kind of based on the idea that there is a someone perceiving, whereas
Exactly.
Kiln Wilber's idea seems to manage to completely do away with the idea of some sort of agent at some point in the structure of things that is perceiving.
I
So
think so. However, and this is the thing, like I ran into a video of somebody describing, it wasn't exactly that part of it, but it was more of like his developmental stages. And even in the way that it was being described through like, the highest level of development, there was still very much an I component to it, which I found
Uh,
distressing. And
uh,
yeah,
uh,
but again, you know, it might have been that person's understanding of it that was still very much filtered through that kind of viewpoint. And like I said, it's been too long since I've read Ken Wilber's actual books to remember how much of a component that was back then.
mm,
Um, but I do think, you know, it's that same thing where like in Zen and other parts of Buddhism too, they have that those um you know, those sayings of like having Mount Fuji balanced on the head of a pin or something. And it's because when we have those extreme um, perspectives of Mount Fuji is gigantic and a pin is tiny, it's always from that I perspective. Mount
uh,
Fuji is huge to me and a pin is
right.
tiny to me. So it's always putting us in the middle of that as the arbiter of the size. The galaxy is gigantic compared to me. Atoms are tiny compared to me. So we're inherently looking at it through that flawed viewpoint of me being the central point. And if you look at it from the standpoint of, you know, compared to the sun, Mount Fuji is absolutely insignificantly tiny. You know,
Mhm.
if we shift the perspective out of this viewpoint, all of a sudden, then, you know, I saw one recently that was showing like the sun compared to, you know, much larger stars. And it's like the sun is just as insignificant as, you know, a grain of sand is to the sun, you know, and it's like this, our sun, which we think is so massive, is just absolutely not even visible on the same scale as some of the other stars that are out there. And so
Boggles
it's
the
like,
mind.
it does. And that's the thing is we're so used to just viewing the world through this particular realm of or uh you know size perspective that we can't even fathom. You know, likewise I saw a really fun graphic that showed you like a human hair, and then compared to that it had like a tardigrade and then all the different like cells in the body, like the different sizes of the different cells and viruses and stuff. And it is like so much smaller than you think it is when you start to see them in relationship to each other. Um, we're
Hmm.
just not used to thinking about things at the scales in which they actually are, because that's
Hmm.
but if you were in the size of, you know, a white blood cell, everything is their whole perspective is completely different. Then a tardigrade is, you know, this huge thing, and you know, viruses, you know, I don't know, like a dog or something compared to, you know, us, or, you know, a little, or an insect compared to us. Like it's, you know, it's just the whole scope is completely based around this center of me being the arbiter. And like, that's why with like the six fetter stuff, we can start to kind of get those experiences where we lose that kind of, um, the sort of definite perspective of size that we think we have. Like
Mhm.
I remember the one time, and this is just a very tiny funny example of it, where like I was standing in the kitchen and Pernilla was next to me and she had a pot in her hand that seemed like, you know, it was a pretty big pot. And then she walked just a few feet away and put it on the ground. It's like, wow, it's a really tiny pot. And it was like, you know, that little thing of like, instead of tracking it, that it's like the same giant pot that's just further away, it's like, no, just a little tiny pot now. And, 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 uh, and, you know, yeah, like, our scope of the way that we view things is just so ingrained until we start to kind of dissolve, and we can't, you know, fully get rid of that. I mean, it's not like it, you know, fully goes away because our viewpoint is always of the world showing up in the screen the way that it is. You know, it's not like you can suddenly see like some, you know, God that's taking in the universe from on high, but our imagination is really helpful for at least, you know, being able to scale it to different sizes.
Right. Huh. Well, I mean, I know this is stating the obvious, but those things have a utility in terms of biology staying alive, and then
Absolutely.
following the DNA's biological imperative to make more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
It's I'm not sure if this is the right way to say it or not, but its function or use has um, exceeded its purpose. You know, it's gotten a bit out of hand.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
Agreed. And I think it's sorry, I just saw a weird thing. I think it's really helpful though for people because people I think when they're doing this stuff and they hear stories about all of the, weird six fetter stuff that happens and all that, it's like they kind of feel like they're gonna stay like that forever. And it's really
uh,
helpful to also remember that no, this is also super useful. Evolutionarily, like you said, we can determine distance and perspective and stuff for a reason. It makes living in this three-dimensional world, the way that we view it and create it, absolutely manageable. And we don't want to absolutely lose that. We just want it to shake us up from that conviction that we have that the way we see things is the way that it actually is.
and for me, it seems like it's also um, that it's necessary to be able to have some kind of regular or frequent awareness of the fact that these are just appearances that are dependent on, this vast number of things. And that's all it is. It's just an appearance. Um, we live with it. It's the way the brain is wired to do things for a reason, but it doesn't mean that we can't live with some kind of understanding of the fact that that's just an appearance.
Yeah.
It has a purpose, it's just an appearance, but it's not actually the way things are. I mean, like that whole thing about an orange, the way it was explained to me as a kid was, an orange is actually a blue. If you're just getting reflected light. And
Yep.
when I first heard that as a little kid, that made a really strong impression on me. And I have never forgotten that. I've always held on to that and then just built on that as the years have gone by. And, I went through that period of my life where, there's a lot of psychedelic experimentation and, things like reading works by Robert Anton Wilson and similar sorts of things. And it's not something that's there moment to moment, but it's not unusual for the awareness to pop up that this is just how things appear.
Yeah.
It's just a subjective experience,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and
Completely.
we really don't know what's out there. The
No.
brain mind is taking in signals and it's very much a gamble the way it organizes those signals and presents some kind of quote unquote out there
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and we don't know what the hell's out there.
We do not. No, no, no. It is, yeah. It's so fascinating that we are, of the world. Like we're not, and like we were talking about, we're not uniquely separated from it, and yet we have no direct contact with whatever the actuality of it is. You know,
Yeah,
we
there's the rub.
yeah, yeah. we, we come out of it, but we can't really know it the way that it is. If there is some, actual way that it is, which I guess we can't really even say that there is because there's no, we know there's like no objective view of something. So
Hmm.
what is it without an objective viewpoint, making it into something like
Hmm.
from the internal viewpoint of whatever it is, if there is, the internal viewpoint of like an asteroid flying through space, what is, you know, what is that asteroid without the sort of definition of it from the outside? giving it a certain
Hmm.
color, a certain shape, a certain weight, a certain density, comparing it to something else?
Well, that's a really great question, but it doesn't look like there's an answer to it.
No, no, but I think that kind of thing can be used as a koan for our own experience too, though.
Yeah,
You know, what is this experience if not viewed from that external viewpoint of how I define the body and the personality and the knowledge contained and all of the memories and all of the things that I attribute to, Toddness or Darrellness or whatever. If it's not being defined by some outside source, what is it? And if it's not knowable by itself, what is it? This even this body can't be known by itself. Like if we didn't have a mirror or reflective water, we would never even know that we had a face. We might feel that there is something there,
right.
but we would have no idea that that even exists, right? In your direct perception, you don't have the back of a head or the back of a body,
Right.
right? Like we couldn't really even draw an accurate picture of ourselves if you couldn't see, another human and extrapolate that you probably have a similar shape to what you see out there. And our internal experience of whatever it is to be us is, I think, what we're constantly investigating with all of this work. Because it feels like there is something here which has a self nature like an asteroid streaking through space. And it's to find, well, what is that unique experience? Is there one unified, unique experience that is to be something without some secondary reflection back of it? And it's like what we started talking about, where we have that viewpoint of, maybe it's the brain's way of knowing itself, or however that whatever we take to be our experience is sort of that secondary reflection of what we think we are. So like whatever we take to be me or the self or anything like that, it, when I talk about like having a mental image of the body and the mind, obviously the mental image of the body is not the actual self, but it's one of those things that then whatever that self-reflective process is like using that to help define itself in the moment.
Right.
Whatever the emotional state is in the moment, it's like that self-reflective process is using that to define how it is right now, what it looks like to outside observers, what it feels like in the moment to have a body that feels like it's in a state of stress or happiness or joy or whatever. It's like using all of those things to know itself, because without that sort of self-reflectiveness, there is just this kind of unknowable panorama of sensation and, you know, indefinite color, sensation, images, sounds, taste, smells. But it's like when we're working with the six fetter, it's really breaking all of those down to see that seeming self-reflective process isn't its own entity. Like there was no individual entity there that was unifying all of these experiences. And then that seeming self-reflective process kind of falls away to where there is just then the sound and the sights and the visual field and all of those things. And I think it's when we get to like the eighth fetter that there is still that feeling of that it's like that last belief of the inherent unique self nature or individual nature that's there, like an asteroid, flying through space. What is that actual nature of it, of this object, if it doesn't have any sort of uh, observer observing it? Is there anything there that is
Yeah.
definable? And I
Right.
think it brings us to that.
Right. I've often wondered if it's not just a case of when things are not being observed, that it just kind of falls into a state of just kind of raw, unmolded energy,
Yeah.
and it's waiting for an observer in order to um, kind of pull it together.
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff in quantum physics about oh God, I can't remember
Yeah, like
the collapse of the wave function,
yeah.
and so that we observe it, and that unmolded state, you know, um, kind of collapses, and it solidifies or seems to solidify into something that we take as a tree or a car, or,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a crazy implication if something like that is true.
Well, I don't have any way of proving it, and I don't know
Yeah.
that anyone ever will, but that's long since been my intuitive sense, is
Yeah.
that that really is the truth of things, as unsettling as all of that quantum mechanical stuff is for a lot of people. That really is, um, you know, the reality of things, or as close as we can get to the reality of things. Um, Especially when you consider, the kinds of things that we're talking about, how, um, you know, is an asteroid there if there's no one there to observe it? And some people might
Yeah.
think that's kind of
Yeah.
cutesy, or it's like a parlor intellectual parlor trick, but I've always felt it's a valid question.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's one of those things where like I know in terms of like photons, do they behave like waves or particles depending on how they're being viewed and or
Right.
observed? And there's some, questions about how to determine those things. But it's like, you know, also I think it calls into the question, what is observation? Like, do we need like a conscious, conscious biological entity to be doing the observing? Like, because what I'm thinking is like, you know, you have like, a rock and you crack open this rock and you find the fossil of a trilobite that's from, millions and millions of years ago that's been fossilized. Did fossil, that fossil imprint not exist until the person cracked it open? Or, there was clearly something that was there in some form, presumably, that biological processes have created. And is there something else then, that extent that is,
Maybe.
you know, allowing millions of years of processes to consistently work on some, you know, level like that doesn't have to have a conscious observer in terms of like, an animal of some sort watching it, staring at it as it eventually becomes this fossil. Do you know what I mean?
I do. It's just,
So,
well, I, I wonder if I, I I wonder if we'll ever have an answer to these things, but I'm inclined to think not.
yeah, I know. I know.
But
I do suspect humans might wipe themselves out before we ever get the chance to have an answer to it anyway, but that's
yeah,
not going to happen.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but all of that reminded me of something that was, I don't know who said it. I don't know where it comes from. But when it comes to this kind of thing, somebody once made the remark that we're all greater artists than we realize,
Mm,
you
that's
know,
right. Yeah.
and something like that, remains of trilobite, inside of a rock for millions of years. That's, it seems like that's, the mundane level. And then there's that, we've talked about at the supramundane level. And when it comes to things like this, I don't really know how those two things reconcile,
Yeah.
you know, because there is that, I guess, broader perspective. Um, and I don't know how that broader perspective works when you consider something like the example you just gave.
Yeah.
you know.
And we also don't know. I mean, we're still, we're using the idea that because we're assuming that what physicists currently believe about, like you said, the collapse of the wave function and that things, are in a state of quantum, um, what's the word?
I guess it'd be indeterminacy.
Yeah, yeah, that they're indeterminate until, something is observed and it collapses into a thing. We're assuming that that's literally true, and
Yeah,
that is also possible. It's completely wrong. It's
yeah.
just the wrong understanding for something that hasn't been figured out yet. So it might be that we're just completely on the wrong trail with that, and we're trying to use that justification to, expand out to explain into ways that it's just not relevant. Again, fascinating to intellectually toy with and create philosophies, little philosophical quandaries about, but it doesn't,
We'll never know.
never know.
And
No,
that seems to be the final statement on anything, when it comes to all these sorts of questions. But I don't know. And
no.
I'm okay with that.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
know some people, they that would not be an adequate or satisfactory answer for a lot
Yeah.
of people, but it is for me. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know, and that's fine.
Yeah. I used to find it very disturbing. Like, I was one of those people that like really wanted to know everything. Like, God, there's gotta be an answer. Somebody must know this. Somebody must have. They don't. They don't.
Yeah. Well, I went through that same thing. There's a time in I guess it was my teens, um, probably even from grade school up through my teens, where I really wanted to know, and I felt sure there was an answer. But at some point in time, in my twenties and possibly my 30s too, a long string of things happened that eventually just um, you know brought that to an end. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know. Doubt I'm ever going to, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Puts you in a much better state to do this kind of work too. It
yeah.
just, I think it might get people on the path when you have that feeling of, I think that's what happened to me, and at least partially was that like, okay, I need to know what is real and what isn't. And I hear a lot of, I've worked with a lot of people who come in with that, like, I just need to know the truth. The
Mm,
problem is the closest thing you're going to find to truth is the fact that we have no idea what that would even be, and that there's no possibility of you finding that. You can find how your constant experience is a relative creation that is leaving you in a place where there is no objective truth to be found. And that is the closest thing we can come to an actual truth, is that everything is relative, and you're never going to find that one thing. But eventually that the thing is, I know for me especially, and for I think most other people who have that, it's really trying to find a way to deal with the insecurity of not knowing. It's about
ah,
wanting control so that you have a feeling of safety. I know this thing, I know what it means. I can categorize it easily. I can understand it. I have some grasp over it. And it's because we don't feel safe. It's because we don't feel safe with the uncertainty of not knowing how things work, and what my place in the world is. And I mean, I used to be stressed because it was like I never believed in Christianity. I was
mhm,
brought up around it, but it wasn't something that I actually like ever felt able to buy into. But there was
yeah.
still always this like thread, because we live in a largely Christian country, where it's like, but what if I'm wrong? And there is hell. And there is, and it was like always that kind of like, but I need to know for sure. Like, am I on the right path or not? Am I setting myself up for some eternal damnation or something if I don't? And there was always that like doubt and that feeling of uncertainty that was in there.
Yeah.
And I think we a lot of times live with different versions of that. And it's that,
Hmm.
okay, it's coming from that place of insecurity, that place of fear, that what if? I don't know the answer? What if I choose the wrong side? What if, you know, I'm completely wrong and don't know how to, save myself in some way, either physically in this life or metaphysically in the next life or whatever it is. It's really coming to terms with that need for safety and security and the ability to just feel fear and not be driven by it or taken over
Mm.
by it, that helps to eventually give us the ability to let go of that need to know and have that absolute feeling of knowing the truth.
Well, I understand that that fear and the need for security because as I got as I moved through my 20s and started to get a clearer view of the world, um, seeing what I thought was um, actually going on out there, Godfrey, um, uh, it led to increasing levels of fear,
Mm,
and um, that's actually a large part of what drove me to drink when I started drinking.
mm,
What was I, 29 or 30? And
mm.
and I'm not done. The work is not done with regards to that, but I've come a long way with that. By the way, if anyone hears that crazy noise, that's Digby.
Aw,
I don't
Digby.
know why he does that. And it seems to be a choice because most of the time he's quiet, but then
That's funny.
various throughout the day, he'll just sit there and he'll make these crazy little noises.
That's hilarious.
Um, but anyway, and I was even thinking about this in the last couple of days, I guess, in light of all of the stuff that's been happening here in the home. But there's this recognition of the fact that when I was a kid, I felt safe,
Mm,
even though there was no reason to feel safe. I didn't
yeah,
know any better, from the
yeah,
time I was aware of the world until sometime in my teens. Um, Even though there were things that happened that were unsettling and created fear and discomfort, there wasn't any sense of the big bad world out there that was a
yeah,
threat. And then at
yeah,
some point in time, that shifted.
yeah,
And so I look back a lot at and it's something that the mind just does on its own. That, gosh, it'd be great to get back to that place when I was a kid because I felt safe then.
yeah,
I didn't know what the world was actually like.
yeah,
And so, now I'm having to do something about that because you can't, well, you can live in that kind of fear, but if you do, it seems like it's going to come with a pretty hefty price. So, I've worked on trying to make my peace with that as much as I can. And yeah, I've gotten to a place of a pretty high degree of acceptance. It's not perfect, it's not total, but it's enough to make it possible to live throughout the day without being in a state of anxiety.
yeah,
Um, this constant fear, and that fear led to anger, and
yeah,
so I understand that. I understand wanting something that'll answer the question, but um, as far as I can tell, there isn't one. There isn't an answer to it. It's that that idea that I read once in it was something from the Zen about how if the road is if the road is littered with rocks and glass and nails, you can't change the road. You have to fashion a pair of shoes to walk on it.
yeah, exactly.
So or as they like to say in AA, and it's spot on, it's an inside job.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it is. I love that. Uh, yeah,
and
yeah,
some people may be frustrated by that because it's like Tuesday. She seems to want, when something is upsetting or causes discomfort, she wants something to just change it.
hmm,
She just wants to be okay. And like,
hmm,
I can't do that for you. I
yeah,
mean, whatever it is, I might be able to do something to help, but I can't just change it.
yeah,
Um, And so it's the same thing with this. Um, I can't just change it. So, the only thing I can do is change me, and which is a lot of how I wound up here to begin with,
Yeah.
with all of the work and all of the searching that led me to um, the path of things that led to narrowing down into this moment, you and I being here talking,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So um, I think that's, as far as I can tell, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
We
I
change
agree.
ourselves, and we unbind ourselves from the world, and find um, um, that Christian phrase, the peace that passes all understanding.
Yeah.
And it's a very real thing.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
I've experienced it outright for periods of time, and now little by little I seem to be heading in that direction.
Yeah.
Where I can, I mean, admittedly, when Susanna says something about the goofball president guy, sometimes there's a shot of adrenaline, like, what
Yep.
are they up to?
Yep.
But it passes, and I go back to, what? I don't know. I don't know what's going to
Mm.
happen.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So I'm just going to let it go and focus on what's right here, right now. And, um, but having said that, for instance, something happened, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know what it was. It may have just been all of the work finally kind of manifesting, but I noticed that two things were real strong indicators. One, Tuesday has said over the last 4 or 5 years, she has said all kinds of really nasty things about me. I
Mm.
mean, she said the kind of things about me that most people, if it was said about them, they, at the very least, they would be incredibly angry and resentful, and they would not be interested in having anything to do with that person.
Yeah.
Um, I went through a period of being troubled by it and then letting it go, and now, there were a couple of days where, well, actually several days where I was having to cook for her and help her with the thing that was causing her pain, and there wasn't ever the slightest trace of any kind of anger, resentment,
Nice.
bitterness, anything. It just was
That's
not
so
there. I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
whoa, that's interesting. Then the other
Yeah.
thing I noticed is that the reactivity to her, and as well as other things, but it especially showed up with her, the reactivity is almost a zero. I
That's
mean, every
awesome.
now and then she'll say something or do something, and there will be a reaction,
Yeah.
and it'll last for a moment, and then it goes away. And whatever it is does not, there's not a residual of, yeah,
Nice.
see, that's exactly the kind of person she is. Yeah, why can't she? And she shouldn't, and none of that. And
Yeah.
even Susanna noticed it. Even Susanna said that she's noticed that I'm not reactive for, by and large. I mean, there is some, but by and large, I'm not reactive. And how did she said I seem much more centered,
That's
was the way she
wonderful.
put it.
Yeah. That's so
So
good.
so there is a payoff in this. It's not
Absolutely.
the kind of canned, convenience oriented quick answer, the TV dinner or McDonald's answer of,
Yeah.
here's a quick fix for you. I mean, we
Yeah.
have those, but again, they come with a really hefty price.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I certainly am, testament to that, because the alcohol should have killed me.
Yeah.
It really should have. And instead I got this.
Yeah.
But you know, it requires work, and that's not the result of any sort of strength of character or of incredible will or anything like that. It's just, I don't know why I'm here and I'm not somewhere else. I don't have an answer
Yeah.
for that, and I don't need one. All I know is this is here. And you know those people who want something, a quick fix, I wish you luck, but I don't think you're going to find it. the
Yeah.
only the only answer I know is you got to change yourself to live in the world that we live in.
Yeah. And it goes back to the Zen metaphor that you had about if the road is made of glass and nails, it's also, you know, it's like practically, so then okay, make a pair of shoes that you can walk on glass and nails, get hurt. Great. But it's also changing your perspective about the road of glass and nails. Because there's
Yeah,
so
you're
much we
right.
would usually be like, oh, this fucking glass and nails. Why isn't it a nice dirt road, a nice soft? And it's like that constant, antagonist. No, no. It's a road that is beautiful. Look at the sun glinting off the glass. That's amazing. Look at all these different shapes that are showing up. Feel how it crunches and makes all these interesting sounds when you're walking on it. And it's like, can you have a completely different perspective of the experience as opposed to just coming at it that no, no, roads should be made of instead. And
Yeah.
it's really all because it comes from that same point of like, it should be here to cater to me and my needs and make me feel good at all costs. And it's like, no, find ways of working with what is here, but not from a place where I'm here to conquer it and change it. I can accept it for the fact that it's here. I can also be, um, it's also where it's like you don't have to still continue to walk barefoot across it and,
Right.
abuse yourself and all that. It's finding that middle way of like working with, but not being antagonistic and resentful and
Having expectations.
exactly. It's just an acknowledgement and a very easy going with where it takes, you know, our needs are still being met and considered. We're not shredding our feet on it and making some big thing out of that. But we're also, we're not in argument or at war with reality. The road just happens to be made out of glass and nails.
That's a great way to put it, at war with reality. Because that in many ways is the source of most of humanity's problem, is that we're
Yeah,
at war with reality,
completely.
you know? Um, and in the last few days, something Pernilla has said more than once, it's comes up in videos of hers, throughout
Hmm.
the videos that she's made available. And I cannot remember exactly how she says it, but she has said something to the effect of, being okay with whatever comes up, like, you've got a plan to go do something and somebody says, well, we can't do that. That thing is no longer available, and I want to do this instead. So in a moment, all of your plans are upended, and being open, receptive, and flexible enough in the moment to go, oh, okay, so that's what we're doing now. And I've thought about
Exactly.
that a lot in the last few days or so.
Exactly. Yeah,
And that's a great place to be at because I get little tastes of it from time to
yeah,
time.
yeah.
You know?
And it's just helpful anytime that it's not there, anytime that your plans change, like exactly what we were talking about, where you have your Darrell moment where you're in the room doing what you want to do, and then now the dog needs to go out, Susanna needs your help, something happens, your plan changes. It's to feel into that, okay, where is the resistance to this moment changing now, to my stopping what I'm doing. I'm finishing writing mid-sentence and then diverting to something else. Where is that resistance felt? How does that show up in the moment?
And that's part of what's made it a little bit tricky. I mean, first of all, I wasn't really looking for it, but it's also been kind of obscured by the fact that the reactivity has been incredibly low. There's
Yeah.
been, I mean, the reactivity has been so reduced that I can count just in the last week, I can count on one hand with a couple of digits to spare the number of
Yeah.
times that it's happened. And I can remember it because
That's
I can
perfect.
remember the other night Susanna wanted something and I got kind of impatient.
Hmm.
I was like, wow, there's a reaction. Whoa,
Yeah.
that, it's weird to see when there's been almost none of it,
Yeah.
but there's still the resistance. That's the thing that's curious. The reactivity has been really low, but there's still a resistance.
Exactly. So this is really, really good. So like it used to be there was just reactivity because you couldn't even realize that there was really resistance there. You couldn't realize that there was something underneath that you were reacting to. Now
Right.
you're okay enough that mostly the reactivity is not happening, but there's still some resistance. So now you just bring your inquiry down to the next level underneath it. So there's no longer you're
Hmm.
no longer like, okay, why am I getting impatient and yelling or something like that? Now it's like, okay, so what is that? Oh, okay, I still feel that there's like a tension when I'm in the middle of something and I get called to do something else. There's still a moment of like, I feel my muscles go clench. Something happens. Okay. Okay, that's what I'm feeling now. So, how is the resistance actually showing up for you? Like, how do you even know that there's resistance to stopping what you're doing and
Well,
shifting activities?
that's a great way to to bring attention to it is to ask that question. Um, how do you even know that there is resistance? That's, yeah, okay, that's great. Hmm,
And if you notice that there's like a thought like, oh, but I just wanted to finish this thing first or whatever, that's still technically reactivity, right? That thought is still keeping you from feeling that feeling in the body that, I've been diverted. There's something here that is unresolved or tense or, I'm being carted off against my will. There's something else happening there. So just okay, be with what is here now. You might also find that, there is a similarity here to something that has been going on for a long time. It's probably not some brand new pattern that all of a sudden at your current age, each time you are
uh,
working on something and then you get somebody needs you something, all of a sudden now you're feeling something new in the body. Most likely, this is something you've been feeling your entire life in a similar kind of situation that you just haven't really noticed because probably reactivity or distraction or something has been sufficiently keeping you from recognizing that it's there. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, you say that reactivity or distraction has been keeping me from recognizing it's there. What is it? The feeling in the body?
Whatever, yeah, whatever the feeling is that comes up when you are not allowed to continue doing the thing that you want to do,
Okay.
or that you feel like you're being imposed upon by somebody else. They are, in control of you and your time. Whatever that sort of foundational issue is that's being tickled every time, somebody calls, Darrell, I need help with something, or the dog needs to go out.
You just hit on one. I think you are absolutely spot on, and you didn't even realize it. Said somebody in control of your time.
Yeah,
Since my earliest years, I have always resented somebody being able to make me or be able to exert demands upon me.
yeah.
That's something I've always resented. Not to the degree I used to, but
Yeah.
it's still there. So
Excellent. So now feel, what does that feel like when somebody exerts their control over your time or makes demands of you that you have to comply with? You can't say, give me 15 more minutes or no, thank you. Not interested. Take care of it yourself. Those aren't on the table. So what does that bring up?
hmm. I can feel it, but I can't put my finger on what it is.
Okay. Just feel
Huh?
it.
Huh?
Just feel it then. Just feel
Yeah.
whatever is there, even if it's not super clear. It doesn't have to be a story about something. It doesn't have to be a specific event that triggered it or anything like that. Just feel what it feels like to not be in control of your time, to feel like somebody else has power over you in that way. You have lost autonomy for that moment.
Hmm.
Is it something that's felt in the body? Is it like a particular
Hmm.
feeling tone in the body?
Yeah, it is. I mean, just right here.
Mm,
I
yeah,
mean, it seems like I could be wrong, but a lot of times these things are kind of diffuse. This
yeah,
doesn't even seem like it's diffuse. It seems like it just centers right there.
yeah. So just feel it. Breathe into that. See what happens to if you bring your shoulders forward. and then roll them up. So you bring them forward, up, and then back so that your scapula come together and your elbows are kind of at the side. And do it gentle, be kind.
Okay.
Where we're just going very slowly up and back so that it's opening up that chest. There's that protective turtling that we tend to do,
Uh,
where we hunch over and sink in to protect ourselves, make ourselves smaller. So it's just one small movement forward, up, back, and then just feel as the chest opens up. Just breathe. What happens as you allow that spot to open and be felt?
I don't really feel it. If I do, it's definitely uh, significantly reduced
Hmm. Relax your
that I can feel it anymore.
yeah.
I think all I can feel now is just kind of the internal buzz of caffeine.
That'll help too. Um,
Talk about a distraction.
yeah, 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 completely. So
Yeah, I don't notice it now.
so you can recognize though that even when it was there, it's still just a sensation in the chest, right?
Right?
It didn't have more to it in your direct experience,
No.
just sensation in the chest.
Right?
And there's an interesting connection there where there's an assumption that somebody else has control of your time, your autonomy, and so you feel this clench in the chest. But also recognize that you are still choosing, even when the dog needs to go out, you're still choosing to take the dog out,
Right?
right? Susanna needs your help. You're still choosing to help her.
Right?
Even if it feels like, I would much rather be sitting in my room working on whatever I'm working on. Now I have to go do this thing. There is a world where you don't do those things, right? Like there is somebody else who could potentially be sitting there who would just go, no, no, take care of it yourself. I'm going to spend the next 3 hours doing what I want to do.
Hmm.
We probably wouldn't think very highly of them. We would probably have judgment towards somebody who is being what we would call self-centered or something like that.
I couldn't live comfortably being that way.
Right. But recognize that that means that you are choosing to do the thing that you
Mm,
might not prefer doing if given the option, but not doing it is even more uncomfortable than doing it.
right.
So you are actually choosing at every moment what is going on in that manner of speaking. It is still helping Susanna and taking the dogs out is still a better option. It still feels better.
Right.
So that's what you're doing. So at no point are you really losing that autonomy, or is anybody actually putting they're not really controlling you in that way. They're basically giving you a different set of options in this moment. Do you stay and continue working on what you're doing, or do you help out? The road has just branched. You now have a left rope fork and a right fork. Which one do you go? You're still choosing the one that feels best based on all the causes and conditions that have led to the Darrell of this moment. Based on that conditioning, helping out feels better than being what we would call self-centered or selfish. So you do the thing.
Right.
But the choice in that manner of speaking is still available. They're just splitting the road into two different options instead of just one. I'm working, 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 working on what I want to do. Oop, now somebody, gave me the option to go do something else or continue this. And you're just taking that fork in the road now. You're taking that little detour before you can get back onto the road that you were on before. That detour that
Right.
helps somebody else who needs something. And that's great. But it's just to recognize in that moment that you still have autonomy. You are still making the choice to help.
Yeah. You're right. I see it.
Excellent.
Master of overlooking the obvious.
But it's what we do,
Yeah, I know.
as a child, like you probably didn't have the choice, right? Like when you're really little, you don't have that kind of autonomy. Your
Right.
parent says, do this, do that thing, physically grab you by the arm and drag you to do the thing. You don't have as much autonomy. But now, using that kind of verbiage where, taking away the whole no free will and no self doing it, to put all that aside for right now, using
Yeah.
this kind of way of talking about it, you are picking the more comfortable of those two options in any moment, and you do have the ability of just, I mean, you could literally just stand up and walk out of the house right now and just keep walking until you hit the Mexican border, right? Like, and you could do anything at this moment, like the however, based on causes and conditions, they're just not likely to happen. There are certain patterns of behavior that we are likely to see in a Darrell in 2025. Then there are certain patterns of behavior that we are unlikely to see, right?
Hmm. You're
You
right.
could run off and join an astronaut camp. Like anything is possible in that regard, but there are certain things which are more likely than others.
Yeah.
Fortunately for the people and dogs in the house, where you are, right now, the realm of potential options that are there is more likely to be helpful than to be totally narcissistic and self-centered and just do what you want to do. So
Right.
it's very fortunate. But just
Yeah.
recognize that there is still that autonomy that is happening in every given moment. Nobody is taking that from you. They are simply giving you a new option.
Okay.
Does the dog
Uh,
go for a walk or does the dog pee on the floor? Which one is the better option?
depends what's going on. Uh, um,
Because the peeing is going to happen one way or another, right? Let's face
yeah.
it. Like, it doesn't actually stop the peeing. It's just a matter of controlling where you would prefer the peeing to take place.
Right. Um, this I guess is it makes sense to bring this up now because it's what we're talking about. That in the last couple of weeks or so, what I've noticed is that and I said this to you in the email. It seems like um, the bodily sensation, the what you call the primary sensation, um, really is sort of the the primary fact of all of this work, or the sort of the root function, or sort of the heart of the matter, because so much of the time when things are going on, if there is a feeling about it or something that's resulted from a feeling, all of that can be traced back to the bodily sensation. Now, I know sometimes a thought will create the sensation, but even if there's a thought that creates a sensation, still usually what happens is some kind of response or reaction will be what results from
Mm,
that
mm,
that that primary sensation. And so it seems like the thing that drives everything else, and the way to begin to break everything down and get to a root cause is, I mean, there's all this other stuff that we're talking about,
mhm.
how, you know, perception, how we choose to interpret things. And all of that is necessary and important too. But it seems like without that primary sensation, a lot of this stuff would, and I don't know how it would be, but it seems like it would be different.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like the way I look at it is that, when we talk about like fourth and fifth fed or wanting and not wanting and all of that sort of thing, and all of the reactivity that we, all of our reactive behavior, whether it's just distracted looking at our phone or yelling and throwing chairs and all that stuff, that's all it's all distraction from that primary sensation. And the primary sensation is what is coming from because of our starting point. It's that primary belief that has been there that's being activated in some way which causes that sensation in the body, and then everything else is coming from that. So the like 4 and 5 work is really helpful, but to me it's also sort of like just pruning the, like pruning the tree. It's cutting off the leaves and the outer limbs. But if you actually wanted to kill the tree, then you go for the primary sensation. You go for the roots, because that's really the thing that is making all the rest of it come out. There are no leaves, there are no flowers, there is no fruit if the roots are dead. If there's no reactive, or if there's no primary sensation there, then there's nothing to react to. There's nothing to make stories about and say, well, this moment isn't good enough. It should be otherwise. It should be different than it is. And I'm very disappointed that it's the way that it is and not the way that I imagine it could be. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, and that's why we do so much in the second fetter with the primary sensation. It's about coming down to the toxic starting point, doing the trauma work, all of that stuff, because then it's much, much easier to do the 4 or 5 stuff to just kind of clean up anything that's left as far as our reactivity habits go, because there isn't that much to react to. We can see much more clearly that I'm not, I don't need to, pick up my phone every 30 seconds in order to distract myself from what I'm feeling when I'm okay with what I'm feeling. Then it's like, oh, yeah, okay, well, that's not actually serving any purpose. I'm not really addicted to my phone. I'm just addicted to getting out of the body at all cost.
Right.
And it's just a defense mechanism.
And the interesting thing about that primary sensation, and I'm glad you connected it to the toxic starting point, because I that was completely overlooked, and that's helpful to see. And that actually that leads to some questions that I need to ask um,
Yes.
about how the primary sensation connects to the fundamental starting point or the toxic starting point. And there's the big one, but it seems like there are a couple of lesser, like 2 or 3 lesser issues that are kind of connected to that. But anyway, what I've noticed is that when it comes to the primary sensation, there are just a very few number of primary sensations or kind of variations on sensation. And
Yep.
then everything else is the mind interpreting that, usually based on what's going on around in the
Exactly.
environment.
It's very contextual.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah, it's like, okay, again, like I like that I tend to use the term haptic feedback a lot for
yeah, yeah.
things. And it's kind of like if you had one of those like, haptic feedback suits that people wear for like virtual reality stuff,
Hmm.
it's like there aren't that many different types of vibration or buzzings or kicks or things that they do, but depending on what you're seeing on the screen, it might feel like all of these different things are happening. Oh, I've gotten shot, or I've been, brushed by somebody's arm, or there's an explosion in the distance and I feel, or whatever it is, it's being interpreted, but the actual realm of sensations or range of sensations isn't that different. There's not that much variety there, but we interpret it differently. And it's exactly that like, we've talked about in the past that you have a toxic starting point around safety, the feeling of, lack of safety and needing that. And so anytime that you have some experience in the world that tickles that old feeling of being unsafe in some way. And it might be really overt, like, there's literally like a traffic accident ahead of you, or, somebody is running towards you with an angry face that looks like they're going to attack you. Or it could just be something, much less immediately dire, where like you hear something on the news that triggers that, like, uh-oh, what's going to happen feeling. Or, you hear somebody cough next to you and you have that moment of like, uh-oh, am I going to get sick? Whatever it is, like it could be even more subtle than that. But when you feel that, you feel that same bracing of sensation that you have probably felt in any situation of lack of safety since you were, a baby, right? Like it's probably something that's been there since even, pre-verbal, right? Like you're like an infant in the crib. Something happens at some point, the body braces in some way, doesn't feel safe. You lock in a certain way. Now forever, that particular sensation in the body equals that feeling of unsafety. So every time you feel that sensation in the body, triggers that connection. It's like that Pavlovian response to like that sensation equals the meaning that I'm not safe. Likewise, anytime that you feel something, like you experience something that gives you the idea that you're not safe, triggers that bracing in the body. You feel that contextually, there's a connection. If I'm not safe, I feel the sensation in the body. If I feel the sensation in the body, it must mean that I'm unsafe. So it creates that feedback loop of reinforcement that I heard a story about the bird flu and I felt this bracing in the body. Well, that now gets taken to mean, well, it's proof I really am in danger now. There really is something to be worried about because I can feel that I'm unsafe. You
Huh.
feel a clenching in the body. That's the same thing you felt since you were a baby. It's just one of those conditioned responses to anything that gives you that idea of unsafety. And now that feeling of that arises in the body is taken as your proof that that thought is true. Yes, I really am unsafe. I do have to do something to protect myself then. The world really is just gonna go to hell in some way. Like everything is falling apart and I can feel in my body that this is true. Well, you're probably feeling these very old sensations that have been there anytime you're in some sort of situation that gives you that slightest hint of unsafety.
So something happens in our earliest years and it gives rise to a sensation based on what's going on in that moment. That sensation is taken to mean this, whatever that
Mhm.
is, for sake of our example, we're saying safety. So that something happens, there's a feeling in the body, that feeling in the body is taken to mean I'm unsafe. And so as we go throughout our life, anytime something happens that stimulates or re-stimulates that feeling, we take it to mean I'm not safe. And so we see that
Yeah,
situation as one of unsafety.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And similarly in the other way, it's like, we use oftentimes the example of like um feeling excited about something is very similar to the feeling of like anxiety in the body.
Yes.
You know, it's the context that makes it what it is. Like if you were really into roller coasters and you're about to go on a roller coaster or you're on a roller coaster and you feel that, excitement in the body,
Mhm.
that's taken as a good thing. Like I'm so excited to go on this thing, or like stage fright even, I'm like so excited to go play this gig. But then if you start to turn into, oh, but what if I screw up? What if I forget? And you start to have, now all of a sudden it becomes an anxiety thing. And then I'm in um putting a different label on it. And so my experience of this same sensations basically is different. Or I'm in a new relationship. You don't know whether you're like anxious about going on the date or excited to go on the date. It's all what the framing of it is based on, the thought
Right.
around it. The actual
Yeah.
sensation is very much the same.
Well, and how does that, and this may not actually be a relevant question. I may
Yeah.
be trying to connect things that don't connect, but how does this tie into 4 and 5 and aversion and can't remember the other one.
Craving.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's basically like if you had an issue with feeling that anxiety or excitement, um, like, for instance, I used to be very, there was a period where because of the anxiety and stuff that I had, I really did not like feeling any change in the body. Like even going
Uh,
for a walk and exercising, feeling the heart rate start to like increase with normal bodily exercise would trigger like an anxiety attack because it was like, oh no, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. I need to be in like a state of stasis all the time.
mhm.
So for me, there was a, an aversion to the heart rate going up because I didn't like the feeling of anxiety that it was provoking. I didn't like this changed feeling of state in the body. So then I would like not exercise because I was, afraid of experiencing that again. When we are, you might like not date because you don't like the feelings that go along with being in a new relationship and either the anxiety or excitement of it or whatever, all of that. That's the way that we stay away from that. I can't be with those sensations in the body, so I'm just going to avoid it altogether. Or, you know, like what we were talking about, if you have that feeling of unsafety, you then go from, okay, I heard something on the news, I feel the sensation in the body. Now I feel very unsafe. I'm quite sure that I'm unsafe because I'm feeling this. Now I'm going to go get a donut. Now I'm going to go get something out of the refrigerator. Now I'm going to go get drunk. Now I'm going to go gamble. Now I'm going to go, turn on the internet porn. Now I'm going to go do whatever the thing is because I don't like this feeling of unsafety that's in the body right now. I don't like the sensation there. So I'm going to do something about it. Maybe I just get really angry and start yelling at the TV because, it's not about this sensation in here. It's about that fucking guy on the TV who needs to do blah, blah, blah. So I don't feel this uncomfortable right now.
Right.
It's like that. It's like so much of that, again, getting into potentially very muddy, complicated waters, but like a lot of what we feel when we feel that like political outrage is based off of feeling really unsafe and really uncomfortable with the way things are.
Sure.
And so the anger that is coming out sometimes does have that kind of like really compassionate, empathic, like I am so, feel so bad for people whose lives are in danger or are being, the suffering that they're going to go through and all of those things that there can be absolutely a real, you know, compassionate response that's behind that. But most often, if we feel back into the body, when we are like getting really morally outraged and indignant about something, it's because we're feeling that feeling of like unsafety or putting ourselves in that position where I know what it would feel like if I was in that state of fear or uh, uncertainty or going through what those people are going through. I feel that, empathetically. I
Right.
don't like that. So I'm going to deflect from that feeling with anger and with outrage and externalize it so that I don't feel like it's really uncomfortable to be an empathic person in a
Mhm.
world where there is so much suffering.
Yeah.
It's that thing of like it's it can be really hard to like enjoy a party or just having a moment of like calm and ease when you're aware of how much suffering and misery there is all around the world. And it's like if you take that into consideration, you can start to feel really guilty for like any kind of enjoyment that you have, and people
Yeah.
very much go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
um and so we either have to learn to sit with that discomfort and recognize that, you know I'm very fortunate that I'm not experiencing that at the moment, and I can
Right.
do everything I can to help those people who are. I feel so bad for them, and I can sit with my own discomfort of the inequality of the world and the seeming unfairness of some people who are in, have such easy, um, gifted lives, and other people who are just living in such difficult situations. And we can really, it's the difference of like, can I sit with the discomfort that inequality causes me, and just allow that to um, feed my sense of love and compassion and wanting for them to have the best possible lives and to do, whatever I can to help that? Or do I have to distract with outrage and anger and, blaming and complaining about things and externalize it in some way? Because that ultimately doesn't actually help anything. It just makes us so that we don't have to feel how inherently uncomfortable we are with the state
Right.
of the world as it is.
Yeah.
So that's really the difference.
Well, that's a good example because I've lived through all of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think we all have. A lot of us have.
Yeah, a lot of us have. Like I say, there's some people that
Yeah, no,
I'm pretty sure don't. But
yeah, it's true.
excuse me. Uh, I'm finding that at least on one level, that this 4 and 5 work is really difficult to do, or it doesn't come easily because whether it's fortunately the whole donut thing is largely disappeared, but
Amazing.
the coffee or any of the other things that I can't even think of what they all are, where I might distract myself, um, where it's wanting to do something, so it's craving or aversion. Um, it's Well, let's just use caffeine as an example.
Mhm.
I might have a cup of coffee in the morning, and then later I want to have more caffeine, whatever form that takes. And when I have the first cup of coffee, there's the thought of, okay, this is going to come up later in the day, and when it does, it's just a thought. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any power. It can't cause this being to get up and go into the kitchen and go
Yep.
through all the steps that it takes to make more coffee. That's
Yeah.
just a thought. It can be set aside. Now, we talked about it a while back, and you gave me the missing piece that was the sensation that
Yeah.
that gives rise to that. So that helped. I'm able to see that there's a sensation that is where the thought comes from. There's a feeling, whether it's a feeling of tiredness or um, or maybe it's just that, don't want to feel a certain something, and the rather nervy buzz of caffeine is a good mask for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so, there's this, hours before we get to that point, there's this recognition of there's going to be this thought. When it happens, it's just a thought. Doesn't mean anything has to happen. There's a
Yeah.
feeling in the body, same thing. And then when the moment of truth comes, sometimes it's just that I forget.
Yeah.
But there are times where it'll come up and I'll recognize, okay, that's just a thought. That's just a feeling in the body. Don't have to do anything. Next thing you know, I'm in the kitchen making another cup of coffee. And that's true with other things as
Yeah.
well. And so this has been repeating itself over and over. I'm like, what does it take to be able to really see? And sometimes I really can. I can really see that
Yeah.
it's just a thought, it's just a sensation. They're insubstantial, they're temporary, they don't require any sort of response or action. Um, but when the moment arrives, it it's somehow it happens anyway. It's like seeing through the thought, seeing the sensation in the body somehow isn't enough. It doesn't
Mhm.
really get us to that point of going, okay, well that's nothing. It doesn't require any kind of response or doing anything about it.
Yeah. This is where, there's a limitation to what we take to be our um autonomous, willful part of our being, right? Like it brings us back to what we were talking about with the how much of this display is us and how much is just this kind of feedback loop for whatever to be able to experience, you know, life and make sense of it, whether it's the brain making sense of it or whatever. So the reason why you even had some sort of addiction or interest in coffee to begin with is plethora of causes and conditions that have led to that being the thing, right? Even in those days when you like can see through the thought and you don't make the coffee, there are so many causes and conditions that have led to the body picking that particular road that day, right? All of those thoughts that came up. So, like, you have the thought about the coffee, and then you have the thought that's about that thought to say, oh, wait a minute, no, that was just a thought. Okay, I can see with that. Okay, now the attention shifts to being in the body. All of that happens automatically, right?
Right.
It's not that Darrell is there choosing to do those things and making that thing that be the case for that day.
Right. It's just things that we've coded, the way that things work, it has been coded for.
Exactly. But we feel like we know all of the causes and conditions or, have some sense of what's going on that has led to that, but we don't. And so we don't also know all of the other things that are below our threshold of observation that have also happened on those days when you go through all the analysis and understanding and then still get up and make the coffee anyway. We don't know biologically what was going on in your body, hormonally what was going on, what other, what dreams you had had the night before, what other stresses are going on in the environment around you that today is for some reason hitting differently than it was yesterday when you didn't make the coffee. There's so many other factors in play at any moment than what we're consciously aware of. So it's not like a failure of that day that you failed to see through it or to change the behavior. It's
Hmm.
that there was, one or many other factors that were just such that coffee was kind of the inevitable outcome of that day. But the more you do it and the more you are introspective and feel through it and just see and really understand physically like in the gut that that thought is not calling you to the coffee, the likelihood that there will be less and less coffee making is good, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be zero. And we don't know, what that coffee is promising to do for the system that was not being accounted for by that thought that is explaining very logically why you don't actually need to follow that thought, right? But the thought for the coffee, or the initial thought for the coffee, still came up because there was something else going on that it was probably, either habitually used to doing or distraction wise keeping you from trying to keep you from feeling or experiencing. So,
Okay.
so there's something that it's coming up for some sort of conditioned reason. Whether the analysis is strong enough to subvert that reason or not is a different story. There might just be something there which that coffee really seems to be serving a purpose for that day, for whatever reason we don't understand. So
Right.
let's acknowledge, okay, well, isn't this interesting? I did not actively choose to make the coffee. I
Right.
did not actively choose not to make the coffee. Isn't this a strange experience? I thought that I had the thought that I don't need the coffee, and yet here I am doing it anyway.
Right.
Fascinating. So notice what it's like, that automaticity of the movement that's doing it that day. Be kind and compassionate with yourself. It's not, again, it's not a failure. It's not that I haven't done the thing right. It's just recognizing, okay, okay. So something was still at play that went unnoticed or that might not have even been in your purview to notice at all. There might have been so many other different factors that were involved. So you can maybe try to feel into in that moment, though, okay, now that I'm making the coffee, is there something that this is presumably going to change in my experience now? Is there, like, what am I getting out of this coffee now that I've made it? Do I have to drink it? Is making it enough? Did
Hmm.
did the distraction of making the coffee serve the purpose? Drinking it is not a fait accompli. Wait.
Fait accompli.
Fait accompli. That wasn't coming out right. Yeah, it's not a guarantee that you just have to drink the coffee because it's been made. You could leave it in the pot.
Yeah.
So now that becomes a new one. Well, what happens if you just stand there smelling coffee? Does that bring up a new thing of, well, but I have to drink it. I can't just, there's a pull there now. Okay, well, investigate that pull. Each step along there is a new potential for investigation.
Yes, I see that. And I see that that's it's a matter of being able to stay focused, pay attention and see it through. Because like for instance, the thing about making the coffee or buying the energy drink, and I don't have to consume this, but I've never gone far enough with it. it stops right there for whatever reason. And I need to keep digging. And I guess that's a habit that needs to that needs to get cultivated, to keep asking, to keep inquiring, to keep investigating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Maybe it's
it's
just
kind of like,
doing.
I forget what it was. There was some kind of work. I think it was when I was in AA, when I was doing a lot of inventory work, that somebody said, you keep asking questions until the questions break down and you can't ask
Yeah.
any more questions.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's like I'm trying to think. It stimulated to mind. I'm trying to think what it was. Something that I came across at some point where it's like, yeah, I can't think of what it was. But it would effectively be like if at some point, uh, really, this is probably a terrible metaphor and not really quite what I'm looking for, but like say at one point you were, really into smoking weed and that was serving a purpose for you, by smoking the weed and you really enjoyed the like grinding it, rolling it into joints, doing that whole thing. And
Right.
then it got to the point where you didn't actually like smoking it anymore, but you found it very therapeutic just to like smell it and feel it and grind it and roll it and then just give it away to somebody else. Like that's still serving that purpose for you that you maybe don't have to go all the way with it, but it's like, okay, well, oh, well, this isn't interesting, so that the meditative quality or something about, that process of it is still enough to serve whatever purpose it seemed to be serving without having to just necessarily consume it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's actually a great example because I've known people who've had that sort of thing.
yeah, there you go. So yeah, it's really finding what is it about this experience of making and consuming coffee that is relevant, that's doing the thing that you think it's doing. Is it the actual consumption of it? Is it the making of it? Is it the smell of it? Is it the anticipation of it? Is it, what part along that whole continuum of coffee uh, is actually the thing that seems to be doing the work?
Okay. Wow. What a question. Because like you said, every step of the way, there's something else that you can be questioning.
Yeah.
Um, and this has come up once before, but I'll ask it again. So it seems like that the work around Fetters 4 and 5, it's not something that's going to happen quickly. I mean, even if some results are seen, like it seems like the reactivity that has dropped away is somehow the result of this. It seems like there's still so much more to be done around around these two fetters. And
Yeah.
it's going to be a process that takes some time.
Yeah, it for sure can be. I think for most people it is. There are like I know when I was doing the work with 4 and 5 initially, there were a couple really big, very clear shifts where it was like, oh, that is a paradigm, shifting experience where things felt really different for a bit. But then it's still really integrating and it's still going back and noticing, it's not like all entirely gone. It's like, oh, okay, well, there's a little bit of something that needs to be worked through. But that's what really brings us to the second fetter again, where we can find that most of the time when there is something there that's causing that little bit of reactivity, it's because there is still some second fetter issue that needs to be seen and to be worked through. Um, we really wouldn't have the craving and aversion issues if we don't have some sort of old trauma material or old toxic starting point belief or something else like that that is underneath the surface that is causing us to be activated and potentially have to react or deflect in some way. So it's like the more of that shadow work we've done, that second fetter work,
Mhm.
the less reactivity and stuff is going to be kind of there and clinging on. And even if we have big shift experiences in 4 and 5, if there is any of that shadow material that needs to be worked through, there's still just going to be occasional flare-ups of something, which is great because it keeps pointing us back. It's not a failure of our work with 4 and 5. It's just a little a little flashlight pointing us back to where we need to look in the shadows.
That's great. Okay. Well, and there's definitely stuff going on with Fetter too that that needs to be done. And I can't say anything about things that might lurk that I'm unaware of,
Yeah.
but there are just a handful of things that I'm clearly aware of. I know that they're there. I know what they are, and there's still a lot to be done around those. I mean, like what I was mentioning earlier, if the issue of safety were totally resolved, there wouldn't be this part of this being that laments and feels nostalgic and wistful about childhood, that time when there was this feeling of safety. There wasn't any sense of or awareness of a world that could be or was threatening,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And so we feel, well, right now, what does it feel like to be unsafe? We can ask the questions of why do I feel unsafe? And there might be some insight there in terms of, what it is that is there actually something around me right now in this room that is physically unsafe? Or is there some imagination, some story about, the world beyond the walls of this house and what might happen in the future, or, those impending threats? How much of my feeling of unsafety right now is warranted based on my actual environment, and how much of it is just imagination and projection based on what we think might happen at some point, but isn't actually an imminent danger? And then how do I know that I feel unsafe? Like it seems like a very simple question, but most of the time we go through life not so much with a feeling of like constant terror or constant, active fear, but there is something about the way that we hold ourselves, something about the way that we move our bodies, something about the way that we feel in the body, something about the thoughts in the mind that give us that feeling of, I can't pin my finger on it necessarily, but I just feel like there is, it's an unsafe world. Try to narrow that down, get more introspective about it, and find out what thoughts are you experiencing right now that seem to be contributing to that belief in unsafety? What feelings and sensations are showing up in the body right now that seem to be giving you that idea that I am unsafe? Is there something there?
and I don't know if this is important or relevant. I may just be going down a road that doesn't need to be gone down, but um, it occurred to me that that idea that I was safe, that I felt safe as a kid, really isn't true. I mean,
Mhm.
that's how it's getting remembered now, but I can remember it was a regular occurrence that my mom and dad would have these really very intense conversations, very sometimes heated conversations about money and
Mhm.
how something was going to be taken care of. And they would just do that right out in the open, which,
Yeah.
not a good idea to do that in
Yeah.
front of a little kid.
Yeah.
And, I think that created a sense of uncertainty and lack of safety. Um, and then, the things I mentioned to you in the last week, with my mom going to the hospital. And still to this day, I have no idea why she went to the hospital. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why she went to the hospital. And there was that, and then there were other medical issues. And I think that created a lot of uncertainty and a feeling of unsafety. Let me let
Sure,
them
sure.
go so they can go bark at whatever it is they feel is a threat.
See, they have a feeling of unsafety.
I forget exactly where we were at with all of that, but
It was about lack of safety, but I actually forget exactly where we dropped off on that
oh
too.
yeah, I didn't know if it had any relevance, if it was just kind of a blind alley or diversion, but that belief that, I mean, it's still there. I mean, I look back on childhood and this, like for instance, certain things pertaining to the 70s will create kind of this warm, fuzzy feeling, this feeling
Yeah.
of nostalgia, kind of a feeling of, you know, if the world could be like that, or if we could get back there. But
Yeah.
that feeling of safety was, you know, it's like something's happened in the process of translation that has created this idea that I believed back then that I was safe. And I don't
Yeah.
think I believed that I was safe back then. I think that
No.
there was a lot of, um, I can't think of the word, but um, there was definitely this sense of, um, I don't know how else to say it.
Or,
It's not the word I'm looking for, but there was definitely a sense of things being unsafe, you know,
mhm.
between my parents and the financial situation in the house and um, neighborhood bullies, which were really a big issue for a number of years. And
Um,
um, I can't think of what else off the top of my head, but I know that there
mm,
are other things. If I think about it, I can come up with a handful of things that point to the fact that, um, you know, there really wasn't a feeling of safety. It may have been that um, I didn't, it wasn't something that I was constantly dwelling on,
mhm.
but looking back, it's impossible to think that that kid felt secure.
Yeah. Yeah. It is funny how that time period then has taken on the kind of idealized version of what it would be like
Yeah.
to have a world that was safe and obviously I don't know why that association has stemmed up, but it's definitely in relationship to how things feel now. You know,
Mhm.
as long as we're idealizing another time that was in the past or will be in the future, you know, make our lives great again. You know, it's that idea that like things were better once, they will be better in the future. We just need to do something to fix it. It's that kind of idealization that is saying that right now just isn't right. Something about right here is not okay. It needs to be fixed. So
Yeah.
instead of like trying to figure out why it was that we idealize a certain time period, it might be more useful to find out why right now just doesn't feel okay. What is keeping me
Mhm.
at odds with the present moment as opposed to, um, how do I fix it and make me feel okay in the future? How much do I need to change the world in order
Mhm.
to make myself feel safe? And we see that sort of thing where it's like everybody else either has to change who they are or how they show up so that I feel okay being out in the world, or, people have to all think and act like me. And, I need to be the consensus belief, so that I feel safe in my convictions. I need to have that reflected back by everybody, like I need to be the one. So whenever we're trying to like pave the world or, pave the glass and nail strewn road to make ourselves more comfortable, we can find out, okay, why do I feel unsafe with exactly the way that the world is right now, with people being exactly as they are? Why do I find that to be uncomfortable? How does that affect my feeling of safety right now? If I idealize a different time that either never was or that I think might be in the future, what is it exactly that I think needs to change for me to feel safe and okay? And we can be compassionate with ourselves and others who are, feeling so wildly unsafe that they feel like they need to change everything, everybody, laws, everything for them to feel okay. Who feel like they need to arm themselves to the teeth just to go grocery shopping because they feel so unsafe in the world. So, we can have compassion for that sort of level of fear and feeling of unsafety. And then, why is it? What are you really afraid of right now? What is really not okay or, not good enough the way that it is? What do you think needs to change? And then, what does that say about you? You know, what does it say about me that I need these things to change for me to feel okay?
Hmm.
It's all an opportunity pointing back to our, greater self-knowledge and awareness.
Okay, that's something the things you were the questions you were asking led to a an understanding or sort of kind of a minor realization about the kind of financial insecurity
Mm,
that was generated um, as a result of hearing all of those tense and very stressful sounding conversations between my parents. And there were other things too that were a part of that weren't necessarily those conversations, but um, I guess I didn't realize that there was because I've done a lot of work around it at one point in
mhm.
time, but
Sure.
there's still a type of or a degree of financial insecurity that still exists.
Yeah.
So, and I think the reality is, and this is something that I, I can say more about later once I've had a chance to do something with it, but I really don't think there's an answer to that. I mean, there are things that can be done, like the reparenting and trauma work, things like that. But I mean, I, I don't think that you can ever have enough if you're going to say, well, I'm going to manage my money and invest and do these things to try to create more income streams and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. There's never enough. If you're going to take that approach,
Mhm.
you'll never get the answer.
No, 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 no. No, because ultimately everything is also uncertain. I mean,
Hmm.
you look at Musk, right? Like he's got literally more money than anybody else on the planet, but
Right.
it's still fragile, right? He lost like, what was it, 100 billion worth of stock or something virtually overnight
Wow.
because his actions have tanked Tesla so bad and has caused such a backlash. His money is not guaranteed. He could be
Right.
homeless at some point. Like there is no security here at all in that realm. So
Right.
thing that we do, and of course, having, relative financial security is important and good. And I'm not saying that it's, that we should be just super frivolous and not consider this and the universe is just going to take care of itself and all that. I'm not saying to kind of bypass all of this in that way.
Right.
It is relevant, but just know that there is no level of actual financial security that is going to be secure. I mean, we see like when countries fall and all of a sudden all the money is just blowing through the streets because it's just worthless paper. We don't even have the worthless paper anymore. We have numbers on a screen someplace that one major power outage, solar flare or something happens, wipes out all of our access to those numbers on the screen.
You're
All of
done.
your hard work building up your financial security is completely meaningless. It's gone.
Yep.
So it's all very, very relative, So as you said, it's yes, we do want to do what we can to, make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and our loved ones and all of that. But that being said, also really coming down to what is this feeling of financial security supposedly providing for me? How is this really, what is this really touching? Because there is no such thing as ultimate financial security.
Hmm.
So, what is it that I'm really trying to avoid feeling by amassing a certain number of digits in my bank account?
Well, it goes back to something else you said earlier. It's trying to mount a defense against the uncertainty of the world.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
I may be comfortable with not knowing in certain areas or certain arenas, but when it comes to being able to take care of ourselves, there's that recognition that you just outlined. That there is no certainty, there is no final security, and
Yeah.
you know, uh, some part of the mind is, foolish enough to think that, if you can just do this, that you'll be okay. Like,
Yeah.
no,
No,
it comes back to having to recognize and acknowledge that you can't be secure,
no,
you know? So,
no. On that note,
yeah.
we, I actually have to start wrapping up because I have a
Yeah.
meeting less than a half hour. Um,
Okay. Yeah. I knew we were going to have to wrap it up soon.
yeah,
We've been on for a while. So,
and that was such an uplifting note to end on. I feel like, we're not going to top that.
no. And yeah, you got to be okay with the truth,
You do, you
Yeah.
do.
If you need a sitcom ending for this sort of thing, then you're going to be disappointed.
Completely, completely. On that note, I
Uh,
also have to. I love your shirt, and I'm curious the because it's like a tarot card with
yeah, it's exactly what it
is
is.
it? Yeah, oh, that's amazing. It's so good. But I was noticing the kind of accidental kind of correlation there that I'm wearing a Furby shirt, and I'm realizing that
Yeah.
the Furby bears a certain resemblance to the Devil Baphomet character that's on your shirt.
Coincidence?
Coincidence?
That's great.
And I love this shirt is you probably can't see it, but it's Furby never sleeps.
Yeah, I saw
Even,
that part.
yeah, even if you take out the batteries. So
Oh, that's great. Oh man. Okay. All right. Well, I'll leave it there and let you uh, get to whatever you need
yeah,
to do next because your half hour is rapidly disappearing.
it is. It is. Thank you. And so I'll see you next Friday.
Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you
Amazing.
then.
All right. Thank
All right.
you. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.